Well, hello everyone. It's been a while, I know. My apologies. I've had another little bit of a bad run with migraines since the last upload where I was asking for some feedback, and that's something I'd like to revisit at some point in the future. But yeah, suffice to say, I've sort of been dealing with some of that, and I'm in a little bit of a better stretch at the moment. I did want to comment on Noam Chomsky and that sort of angle on the whole Epstein file release. I find that quite interesting. It's one of these things that, as I look at it, it sort of further cements my personal philosophy about kind of like ideas need to stand on their own merits. Hero worship is kind of dangerous. And, this just is more evidence to support that, I think. Ultimately, yeah, it might surprise some of you to know that I do have some respect for Noam Chomsky, at least the Noam Chomsky of old, probably prior to the pandemic. I sort of feel like he'd already lost his mind, or the evidence that he had kind of a Sam Harris fall from grace, at least in my eyes, was there around the pandemic. Some of the things that he said about unvaccinated people. And I think that was completely evident in the moment, but certainly since that time, it's become increasingly evident that was crazy talk, and it wasn't very principled. And you could probably make an argument that it was a departure from some things he had said in the past, or whatever. But it certainly doesn't. It doesn't discredit a lot of the other things that he had said in the past, a lot of other issues that he had brought to light, a lot of other brilliant expositions on various topics. Certainly the whole idea of manufacturing consent, all of that, and many of his other things. Now, I do disagree with him on certain things, but I would disagree with him in a respectful manner, probably. If I had the opportunity, I'd like to sit down with him. I'd like to, grill him on these things. I'd like to trade some barbs, perhaps. I would like to ask him some very specific, pointed questions about some of it and see if I could, expose a flaw. In other words, where I could get him to actually concede a point here, there, wherever. But generally speaking, I have a lot of respect for him, or at least I did. And these new allegations or new indications of his friendship and even counsel to Jeffrey Epstein doesn't actually change any of those ideas, because again, they stand on their own merits, and it's obviously very dangerous to have principles and concepts and ideas subject to the continued respect, that the public respect for an individual or their behaviors and things like that. Like, that's not how ideas work anyway. That's not how concepts work, but we sometimes treat them that way. That's the danger. And of course, there's the one in particular, the one letter where he was giving Jeffrey Epstein some guidance on what to do about the public response to his, convictions by that point, but even just the allegations against him about engaging, with minor children, essentially. It really is evidence of what I've often called a blind spot. I've got this club that I developed in my own mind of people that I just acknowledge are really smart, and I call them the smartest guy in the room. And Noam Chomsky would definitely be, in that club, the smartest guy in the room club. And then I, come to realize that everyone's got a blind spot, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of their intellect is destroyed. Where they're sharp, they're sharp. Where they have a blind spot, they have a blind spot. And by the way, that assessment of a blind spot, of course, extends to myself. So this can be my own perception of this person, and I'm aware of that at all times. It's kind of like perceptions and conclusions are in a state of flux, and I think it's healthy to view these things that way. That's not to say that I don't have a lot of ideas that I hold pretty firm. I'm just always willing to be proven wrong, or at least I'd like to think that I am, and I try to treat it like science. These things are provisionally true. So the things that I hold are provisionally true, subject to new evidence, etc. And so this recognition of the blind spot does have to do with the fact that is my impression, my interpretation of these people, regardless of how strong or weak that might be. And that's ultimately why the ideas have to stand on their own merits, because that's how we assess the validity of the ideas, is on the merits of the ideas themselves, not on our perception of the person, the individual in question. And so, giving blind spot is kind of an interesting way to view it, I think. Because it's sort of like it's an area where they can't see clearly, and their normal propensity for clear internal critiques and analysis just seem to fall apart. And it's because they got some blurry vision in that area. And this is definitely one of them, because you've got, a man who has been convicted again by this point of these crimes. And if you read the way in which Noam Chomsky was advising him, he was acting as though these were just some accusations made by a woman who'd had a date gone wrong, or was unsatisfied with the outcome of a night on the town or something like that. It was as though it was that. And in fact, he kind of compared the criticism and whatnot that Noam Chomsky himself would get to that the public was leveling at Jeffrey Epstein. And in a way, it was almost as though he was extending his own innocence to Jeffrey Epstein. It's kind of like saying, just like me, you are facing this. And when I face it, here's what I do, and I would recommend you do the same. So he's kind of extending his own presumed innocence of the charges that are made against him by people in the public to Jeffrey Epstein, as though he's not been credibly accused vis-a-vis an actual conviction, and more than one allegation, of course, numbers of them. I think it was pretty well known by then. So to me, that's a really glaring blind spot, because someone of Noam Chomsky's intellect would have to know that one allegation made by an adult against another adult with no evidence, okay, maybe that's, and if you're friends with this person, you might even talk to them about it, and they might say, and they might convince you, they might, look at you without blinking and say, and categorically deny that anything like that happened. They might give you some extra information about how she was actually a little disgruntled. She was mad you wanted to go Dutch, or I don't know what, and that, you could give him some motive for why this person might make a false accusation. You might be able to convince somebody, but then 2, 3 accusations, and then they're kind of more salacious allegations, right? It's not just a woman who's, whatever. It's now we're talking about underage people and many other things. Like at some point, you would think at some point in the quiet moments, someone like Noam Chomsky would have to ask himself, is it possible that this is true? So it just seems really odd to me that he would extend, again, his own innocence to Jeffrey Epstein in the way he was giving him advice about how to respond to all of this pressure. It's quite something, really. The other thing that got me, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, regarding Chomsky and Epstein, is I just don't understand what the hell he would have seen in Epstein. I'm aware of my own bias, like in terms of, one of my other personal philosophies is to be aware of the degree to which I can verify everything that I claim to know, or that other people assert that I should accept as fact. And I'm aware that I've got a limited amount of access, or have taken a limited amount of access to who Jeffrey Epstein is as a person. Like most of it's been somewhat curated to me, And there's, lots that I'm not privy to because I didn't know the man personally. Like knowing someone personally is obviously quite a different thing. Any of us who know anyone personally who's been, gosh, it doesn't even have to be somebody who's been in the press or in the news or in media. It can just be somebody who's got kind of local fame, like a doctor or a dentist or someone like that, right? Like there's often, cases, there's people that I know personally who are those kinds of people, and I know a lot more about them as an individual than the average person does. And it's interesting to me how different that picture can be. So I'm aware of that with Epstein. But I got to tell you, everything I've seen, every time I've seen him interviewed, seen him talking, like, first of all, he's just kind of a weird guy. Like, he's got a weird presence. He's got a strange sense of humor. A lot of his attempts at humor don't seem to carry off, right? Like they just don't seem to transfer. The person that he kind of has to make a nervous chuckle and then kind of abandon that line of discussion because he doesn't get the desired response, I don't think. He's just kind of a weird guy. And he's got weird ways of framing things, and he also just doesn't come off as all that smart, which is hard to fathom with respect to Noam Chomsky, because you would think someone of his intellect would want to engage with similar people, with like people. And it would be tough, I think. When you're of a certain caliber, it's going to be more difficult to find people to converse with. I'm not putting myself in that category, but I am in the category where I don't get along well with just general groups of men. I can't go hang out with the boys. I mean, I can, but the problem for me is I just get immediately bored with the sort of surface talk, usual day-to-day weather, sports, typical, whatever, potty humor, basic sex humor, stuff like that. It just doesn't do much for me. I need more stimulation. I need to talk about deeper issues, ethics and philosophy and politics of the day and even interesting, very deep technical things. I need that stimulation. And I just don't understand what someone like Noam Chomsky would have seen in Jeffrey Epstein. And my wife had said something like, maybe it was just the money and the gifts kind of thing, right? Because Epstein did have something to offer there. And it sounds like he did offer some expensive trips and expensive hotel room stays and things like that Epstein would have offered to Chomsky. And that makes it even worse, actually, if that's the case. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the case because I don't know. And I'm very careful about mind reading. But if that were the case, it would be much worse because, what we're depending on with someone like Noam Chomsky is intellectual integrity. And if he really didn't even like the guy that much, and it was really just for the gifts and the opportunities, that would be much worse. I suspect, though, that that's not the case. I suspect that for whatever reason, for whatever blind spot he has or whatever, that Noam Chomsky just liked him. And that was the nucleus of his blind spot with him, was that he liked him as a friend, and he had some denial. He didn't want to believe that any of these things were true. And so he was acting on that. And that at least is just good old human fallibility, I think. That is the reason why I don't invest myself fully in any given person. And I also don't reject people completely out of hand either. I haven't read Mein Kampf, but I guarantee you there are things in there that a person could learn from. Now, is that some kind of an endorsement of Adolf Hitler? Obviously not. But it's a recognition, it's an acknowledgement that no one person is 100% evil or incorrect or void of any possible thing that we could learn from, and no one person is chock full of only positive lessons for us and positive points of view and things like that. That, the ideas have to stand on their own, and Obviously, there are a lot of people who are really upset about the whole Noam Chomsky thing, largely people on the left who were, big fans of his. And really, in some ways, they needn't be. It's actually an indication, the fact that they kind of are is a bit of an indication that they had a little bit of a false hero worship or an unhealthy hero worship of the man. And I think it's a good lesson for everybody. Don't invest yourself too much in any given person. Let the ideas stand on their own merits. And we really should get back to that. We really should get back to addressing ideas, debating each other. May the best ideas win. Make good arguments. Bring evidence to the table. Point out bias where you can. Point out, human fallibility where you can, so that we all get off of our soapbox, get off of our damn high horses, and get back to reasoning together. And one more thing. There are people in the sort of philosophical space who will talk about holding people accountable for the company that they keep. And this often happens when people are trying to kind of absolve themselves of any responsibility for having chosen a poor partner, for instance. This is generally speaking women, and I think, it could be a lot of that. It's women because women are kind of the group that we associate with being oppressed or something like that, even in relationships. So if a woman has a bad partner, it doesn't have to be abusive. I mean, obviously abusive is another thing entirely, physical abusive, but even just a lame duck, someone who turns out not to be, all that ambitious, doesn't do much around the house, just kind of games or something like that. And a lot of people will just sort of absolve the woman of any responsibility for that choice. And it happens with men too, but it tends to be more with women. And there are groups of people who push back against that and say, no, your choices. First of all, it's not very empowering to act as though you have no power in that at all, that your perception doesn't need to be honed, that there might not even be some reasons that you have made, especially women who tend to make bad choices like repetitively, like they always end up with a guy who's no good, and that can even be physically abusive as well. Like there's a reason why you're ending up with these kinds of people. And I think somewhere in the middle is probably the answer. In other words, I agree that there's a certain amount of responsibility that a person has for the company that they keep. And we should take that responsibility because it then empowers us to make better choices. And it empowers us, it empowers us in the future to make those choices. And that can only be positive, I think, especially if it causes someone to maybe analyze their past a little bit and see, like, why might I be making these bad choices? Why might I be choosing people who are actually ultimately not good for me? That ends up, creating all kinds of upheaval in my life that I end up having to uproot myself once again. I've established this partnership with a person and now I've got to move again and disassociate with this person and divide assets and all this terrible, terrible stuff. I mean, I've been through it myself once and it's not good. A long time ago, long time ago now, ancient history, but it's pretty disruptive to your life, right? But I think you can go too far with that and write people off because of the company they keep. That's sort of one of the things that has been done recently. That's one of the cultural pressures that are on right now, it seems like, is everybody wants to relegate someone to the scrap heap of human irrelevance because they expressed some or showed some friendship or were even just seen with another person that has been roundly rejected based on whatever. And I think we should be a little bit more careful with that. Judge lest you be judged, for one thing. And that ties into something else, another observation of mine, which is not much of an observation, but it's really important, especially when it comes to potential hero worship for sure, because that's where, that's where our own bias is the most active, I think, is when we really put all our eggs in somebody's basket. But, we're all fallible. And so I'm a little bit on the fence with Noam Chomsky, because I do feel like a person like him, it's sort of like, I think a police officer should be held to a higher standard with regards to breaking the law than the average person, because there's a public trust that's been put in this person. And if they're breaking the law, that can't be tolerated. Obviously, it should be made an example of, but also, they basically took an oath to this public trust, and we should be able to depend on them even more than just the average guy, certainly more than the average street criminal, for crying out loud. And I think the same of a public intellectual. I think the guy is elevating himself to a different place in the human structure, and he has a higher responsibility to not cavort with devious people. So I'm willing to grant him a certain amount of basic human fallibility and that blind spot thing, and not completely just write the man off. But then again, we are talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And the more that comes out, the more obvious it is that, this man was engaged in a lot of very terrible things. And what does it say about your judgment that you would be good friends with the man? If you didn't have much to do with him, you saw him a couple of times at a club or whatever, you went for dinner a couple of times, how much judgment should you have? Who knows? But the more time you spend with him, the more questionable that becomes. And so I think I'm not really willing to grant Noam Chomsky all that much leeway on this one. I think this is a bridge too far. He's too smart of a person. We should have more expectations of better judgment from him than that, and he should really know all of that. The other thing is, and this, like I said, this is an observation of mine. It's not much of an observation, but I think it's important to verbalize it, because we all need a reminder, I think, periodically, myself included. And it's something that I tell my wife often. We'll see something on the news, we'll see someone moralizing about something, and they're really moralizing about it, right? They're not just saying, hey, we should all watch out for this is an issue or whatever, but they're on their soapbox, they're on their high horse, acting as though they're kind of perfect, right? They're really moralizing to people. They're not just pointing out moral issues, they're moralizing. Holier than thou, that type of thing. And I always say to my wife, just follow that person around. It's kind of almost like that's your indication that this person, because it seems almost inevitable. Now, this is, there's a confirmation bias involved here, but, it's good to be aware of your biases. And there is a confirmation bias at play here, but it seems inevitable to me when I see somebody moralizing like that. I can be sure that in a month, 16 months, 5 years, I'm going to find out a huge scandal about them. It's going to be unequivocal, like it'll be, emails or videotape or something like that, or they'll just admit it outright or whatever, that completely blows the lid off this position, this soapbox that they were on. So I would say the same with Noam Chomsky. This is a little bit of a confirmation of this idea of just follow that person around. Again, it's just another way of saying the same thing. Don't invest yourself too fully in anybody else. Invest in their ideas if the ideas are sound, and engage in introspection. Do hot tub deliberations. Make sure that those ideas really are sound, that they're impenetrable. Do the steelman, attempt at and internal critiques and all of those things. Engage in running ideas out to their logical conclusions. Try attacking them from all different angles. See if there's any way that you can pierce, the seeming armor of these good ideas, and be happy with those ideas. But even at that, hold the ideas as provisional. And finally, just keep in mind, in the spirit of my idea of always being aware of the degree to which I can personally verify the things that I claim to know and the things people assert that I should accept as fact, are fact. This is all presuming that the reportage is largely accurate on all the things that have taken place, etc., etc. I think it's important to be always aware of that and to leave that little crack open, you know, that these ideas are provisional. And it does remind me of the singer-songwriter Matthew Good. He's got a song, and it's a great song. He's one of these other people who, you know, a lot of blind spots in this man, makes great music often. And he lost his mind during the pandemic too, let's just say that. But the one song that he's got, there's a line there that says, "I used to ride around here on my high, high horse." Indeed. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.